Hello and welcome. You're watching I24 News coming to you live from Tel Aviv. Hamas says it will not return to hostage talks as the IDF warns citizens to evacuate suburbs east of Rafah in the Gaza Strip. 2 hurt as Hezbollah sends an explosive-laden drone into Betula in the north of Israel. And warnings of a large-scale massacre in the Darfur region of Sudan as the RSF militia closes in. Those are the headlines this hour. Well, the IDF is warning people in Gaza to evacuate neighbourhoods east of Rafah. Amid signs, the IDF is preparing to launch an offensive in the last Hamas stronghold. Thousands of Palestinians have been seen leaving the city. The Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, says Israel has no choice but to go into Rafah after hostage talks collapsed. The group has warned that an operation in Rafah will be no picnic for the IDF. Our Robert Swift has the latest.
The Israeli military is directing residents in some areas of Rafah to evacuate. By text message, airdrop flyers and phone calls, the IDF instructed an estimated 100,000 people to move from the southern Gazan city, Hamas's last major stronghold. Some appeared to be following the instructions, which directed them to an expanded area designated by Israel as a humanitarian zone. Israel has faced months of international pressure not to enter Rafah, due to fears over the impact on the roughly 2 million people sheltering there. But Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant told his US counterpart Lloyd Austin that Jerusalem was left with no choice but to act following a Hamas rocket attack close to the Kerem Shalom crossing on Sunday, which killed 4 Israeli soldiers and wounded 9 others.
We
recognise alarming signs that Hamas actually does not intend to follow any agreement with us. This means action in Rafah and the entire Gaza Strip in the near future.
The IDF said that its shaping actions are for a limited operation in specific areas of Rafah. But with Hamas and the Israeli government refusing to cede ground in ceasefire negotiations, the likelihood of a large-scale battle over the southern city is growing.
Well, for more on all of that, I'm joined in the studio by Yossi Melman, intelligence and defence commentator and the co-author of the book Spies Against Armageddon. Good to see you, Yossi. Thank you for being with us. The EU, France, the United States, they're all warning Israel not to go into Rafah, the last Hamas stronghold in the Gaza Strip. Does Israel have any option now?
Well, Israel is not listening to the warnings of Biden not to enter Rafah. Israel is on the verge of entering Rafah. The invasion hasn't started yet, but first Israel is asking the population to leave, to go to their humanitarian zones, designated areas. And once Israel decides to move in, it won't be an all-out war or a full-scale war. It would be gradual. Israel will move, the IDF will move with its troops to neighborhoods in order to mop up operations, to clean it, to kill Hamas fighters, and then to move to the next one. But until more people are being evacuated, I don't think Israel will start the operation. And already Biden, in his conversation just a few minutes ago or an hour ago, over the phone, he talked to Netanyahu, and he once again warned Israel not to move into Rafah, and above all to open the Kerem Shalom crossing border.
Crossing that Hamas attacked.
Yes, exactly, which was
killing 4 Israeli soldiers. So now Biden is saying to Israel, you must reopen this crossing.
Because that's one of the main entries for the humanitarian aid to come in. There is it comes from the Rafah crossing with Egypt. It comes from Kerem Shalom. There is a little aid being supplied from the north, and everyone is waiting for the floating pier, which the U.S. Army is building.
Right, which they've had to delay because of choppy seas.
Well, I think it's still according to the plan. They were talking from day one when Biden declared that the U.S. would build this. They were talking about mid-March, so still there is a time. Already there is a ship loaded with humanitarian aid waiting in Cyprus.
But what's the plan for getting the aid from that pier into the people who need it in Gaza? Because, of course, the pier itself came under attack. UN officials came under attack while they were looking at the pier by Hamas.
It's safer in the sense that the friction between the IDF and the local population and the Palestinians would be smaller. That's the raison d'etre, and also it's another port of entry for humanitarian aid, because this is the main concern, that the scenes that we saw in northern Gaza in the first months of the war now will be repeated in Rafah.
OK. Yossi, for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's talk a bit more about Washington, because the CIA Chief Bill Burns is in Israel tonight, trying to salvage the hostage talks, which do appear to have collapsed. Hamas says that it's pulling its teams out of Cairo. Burns was in Doha, Qatar earlier. And the US has made it clear it opposes an offensive in Rafah. Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden spoke on the phone a short while ago. For more on that, we're joined by our senior US correspondent now, Mike Wagenheim. Mike, President Biden unmoved by Israel's arguments, it would seem. He says do not go into Rafah. He also wants that border crossing that was attacked by Hamas yesterday to be reopened.
That's correct. A readout of the call between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu, released from the White House about 10 minutes ago. Those readouts, you always try to read between the lines. There are words like agreement, words like we'll further discuss. There was nothing like that in terms of Rafah. It simply said the president, referring to President Biden, made his position on Rafah clear. He has a clear position, quote unquote, on Rafah. There was nothing about further discussions on that. It tells you all you really need to know about how that discussion has gone and where it's headed from here. They also discussed Yom HaShoah and anti-Semitism in general. Also, as your guest mentioned a moment ago, keeping the Kerem Shalom crossing open. The readout said that Prime Minister Netanyahu agreed to do so, despite what happened there in recent hours. So, again, just obviously tensions right now in terms of a potential Rafah operation, and only getting tenser as the days go by.
Mike, for now, thank you very much indeed, Mike Wagenheim there. Well, let's get an update from the south of Israel. Our correspondent, Zach Andrews, is there. And Zach, we've been looking at live images of Rafah. We can see explosions. Just give us a sense of what's going on.
Yeah, as far as we can tell, that phone call with Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden has already netted results. The promise is that the Kerem Shalom crossing will be opened for the duration of whatever is to come next. And that's what we're hearing, at least from this call. Now, the Kerem Shalom crossing was closed yesterday as a result of those 4 soldiers who were killed by the fire that came from Rafah. You can see over to my right, the dust is settling from some of the previous strikes in the eastern area of Rafah. These explosions, since we've been here over the last 2 hours, have been consistent. I've counted over a dozen now. These appear to be airstrikes, as we're hearing the ongoing artillery as well. This has been remarkable to watch, knowing that at about 9 o'clock this morning, the civilians were issued the evacuation notice. We're told about 100,000 or so in the eastern half of Rafah were told they needed to leave and head towards the coastal refugee area. We're seeing mass movement of people anyways, not just from East Rafah, from all over Rafah, trying to move ahead. Now, the official evacuation notice that was handed out with the flyers, the pamphlets that were dropped from the air, telling them do not go north towards Gaza City, to head towards the coast. That is the evacuation notice as it stands now. The evacuation notice came in and the airstrikes followed almost right behind it, and this has been pretty consistent from what we can tell, in mostly confined to this eastern half of the Rafah area. So it is quite remarkable to see the amount of aerial activity that is taking place, and obviously concerning as we get these conflicting reports out of Cairo that potentially this hostage and ceasefire talks are falling apart.
All right, Zach, thank you very much indeed. Zach Andrews there, down in the south of Israel, with an update. Yossi Melman's here with me in the studio. It would appear then that the IDF is already carrying out airstrikes in Rafah, even as those civilians leave?
Well, they are very limited, and there are more warning strikes in order to that the Palestinians would get the message and leave. Maybe some very precise known Hamas locations have been struck, but all in all, it's just the beginning. And it's interesting what Biden, the reports about what Biden announced, or the statement issued by the White House. But they basically said, "This is our position. You know it, Mr. Prime Minister. Now it's your call. Whatever you decide, and we might take our own stand."
Right, because we had an unconfirmed report yesterday on Axios that the United States temporarily blocked some arms shipments to Israel last month. That would be unprecedented. That would suggest perhaps serious consequences.
Exactly, Laura. You know our position. If you decide to go against our advice, you might be exposed to the ramifications of your own decisions, which means maybe delays in the armament supply, maybe some sort of sanctions, because probably Biden knows that the only language that Netanyahu understands is the language of pressure.
Right, because the criticism of Prime Minister Netanyahu of late has been that he is incapable of acting, incapable of making a decision. That pressure would add to that, it would seem.
Yeah, everyone has witnessed it. Hamas knows it. Many in Israel realize it. And so the administrations, they know very well Netanyahu, that he's hesitant and he's torn between his, on the one hand, his coalition partners, right-wing coalition partners. Yesterday there was a unique scene that cabinet ministers left the cabinet meeting and went to join the demonstrations against the government, their own government, which is unprecedented.
Well, the other argument is that President Biden has actually inadvertently helped Hamas by putting so much pressure on Israel and made it easier for Sinwar to sit and drag out the negotiations as long as possible and, in the end, just simply walk away.
Yeah, but President Biden doesn't work for Netanyahu.
No, sure.
Does he own him?
There are American hostages in Gaza.
Yes, but there are also American interests, and they are not always compatible with the Israeli interests.
You're not suggesting the Americans want to keep Hamas in power?
No, but they have their own interest in the region. Saudi Arabia, Oman, the Middle East, Iran, and they have to wait and calculate and to juggle between all these conflicting and contradictory interests. I think the United States has done a great deal of helping Israel in this war, despite the world is turning against Israel. All these demonstrations, the threats about sanctions, and still Israelis are very unhappy that Biden is on their side. After all, he is on the Israeli side. One shouldn't forget it.
All right, Yossi, thank you. Well, talking about the regional implications, Egypt has raised its level of military preparedness in northern Sinai, just across the border from Rafah. And an unnamed high-ranking Egyptian source has told Arabic media that Hamas's deadly missile attack on the Kerem Shalom crossing yesterday is the reason the talks collapsed. Meanwhile, Jordan's King Abdullah is meeting President Biden at the White House tonight. For more on all of that, we're joined by Dr. Nazir Al-Amari, independent writer and political commentator. Thank you for being with us, Nazir. And we're hearing that Egypt is desperately trying to stop an escalation, an IDF offensive in Rafah. But realistically, at this point, what can it do?
Well, Egypt is trying to contain this conflict. They believe that an invasion of Rafah will definitely spill into Egypt. It will create all kinds of problems. So far, the Egyptians are making sure that no Gazans have any path to enter Egypt, and they are, using all types of methods and strategies to pressure the Biden administration to pressure Israel to contain this conflict. The same thing with all the Arab leaders. They are placing a lot of pressure on the Biden administration to do something about what seems to be an upcoming invasion of Rafah, because they understand this will create serious problems for their regimes and their countries.
And Israel says it has to control the Philadelphia corridor. It has to stop Hamas from smuggling weapons from Egypt. We've talked before about Egypt's interest in those tunnels as well. Do you think when it comes down to it, Cairo will cooperate with Israel in closing those tunnels?
I think the Sisi regime does not see any value for itself or Egypt to strengthen Hamas. However, publicly they have to come out and say that they're against all these Israeli plans. They have to speak against Israel. But I think, like the King of Jordan, the Saudi Arabia, the Mohammed bin Salman and Sisi, all of them are actually on the same page when it comes to ending Hamas and moving toward a Palestinian authority that controls both Gaza and the West Bank. However, publicly you hear this condemnation of Israel, but I think they agree on with Israel that Hamas has to go for any type of peace or stability to come back to the region, and most importantly to Gaza.
And another country, of course, is Jordan, which is watching closely all of this. Jordan's King Abdullah is meeting President Biden tonight at the White House. Jordan has been strongly against an offensive in Rafah, but we rarely hear from the King directly, do we? We've been hearing a lot from Queen Rania, however, who is, of course, herself a Palestinian. She's been on a lot of American TV networks lately. Why do you think that is?
Well, she is, of course, a queen. She's relatively popular, and she's pretending to be, living in a democracy where people are not oppressed. So she's criticizing Israel for its human rights record, for suppressing the Palestinians. But the same human rights organizations have condemned the king for corruption, for imprisoning Jordanians, for suppressing Palestinians. So this is just the king and the queen, pretending to be the modern and moderate monarchs who are America's allies. But in fact, the queen is criticizing Israel for things that she herself and her husband are doing to the Jordanian people, according to reports by human rights organizations. So, the Biden administration needs to show that they are talking to both sides, that Arab leaders are in the White House. The Biden administration wants to show that they're balanced, and the king, helps with that image. Other than that, really, the king is on the same page with Israel and the Biden administration when it comes to Hamas, when it comes to Iran, when it comes to all the complicated issues facing the region at this point.
And on that note, we did see protests in the Jordanian capital, Amman. A lot of people marching in solidarity with the Palestinians, but also demanding that Jordan put an end to its peace treaty with Israel. Have those protests kind of fizzled out?
Well, they haven't fizzled out. 1,500 people were imprisoned because they participated in these peaceful demonstrations. You may disagree with the demonstrators and their support for Hamas, but the fact of the matter is the public opinion in Jordan accuses the king of being pro-Israel, of being a puppet of the West, and that doesn't help. The Jordanian people are not represented, they are oppressed, and the queen is lecturing Israel and lecturing the West on justice and fairness and freedom of expression. This is really rich coming from a regime that is oppressing its own people, including the Palestinians in Jordan.
Nasir, thank you very much. Dr. Nasir Al-Amari there.
Thank you.
Yossi Melman's with me in the studio. I mean, despite all the very public hand-wringing, do you think that the regimes in both Jordan and Egypt are as keen as Israel is to get rid of Hamas?
Well, first of all, my Egyptian colleague talked about the fact that Jordan is...
He's Jordanian, I believe.
Jordan. I'm sorry. That Jordan is not a democracy. We know it. It's a monarchy, but also the same situation is in Egypt. Now, there is one more factor which has to be remembered. Half of the Jordanians are Palestinians. So the king has to balance. I'm not rushing to defend the king. He has to balance and take into the consideration the public sentiment. And the public sentiment is against Israel. In the Arab world, not at the level of the rulers and the governments, but the level of the grassroots. And therefore, she and the king occasionally need to express their feelings about the situation and to address it.
Let's not forget Jordan helped shoot down those rockets fired from Iran not so long ago.
Exactly, and not only that, there is an ongoing, long-standing intelligence and military cooperation between Israel and Jordan for the last 50, 60 years. And this cooperation is conducted almost on a daily basis between the armies of the two countries, between the intelligence communities of the two countries. And therefore, the king knows very well that Israel would always rush to his rescue if he goes into troubles. He's surrounded by so many enemies: Syria on the north, Iraq on the east. He has distorted relations over the West Bank with Israel. So, and there is the question of the mosques, holy mosque in Jerusalem. So, Jordan is the guardian of the mosque.
It's complex to say the least, isn't it? All right,
Yes.
For now, Yossi, thank you. Now, the Qatari news network Al Jazeera says it will fight Israel's decision to close down the channel here. The government voted unanimously to close the channel yesterday, calling it a security risk. Al Jazeera is already banned in Egypt, the United Arab Emirates and several other Arab countries. Hannah Rifkin has this report.
A contentious decision by Israel's Netanyahu government on Sunday over what it deems as harmful media coverage by the Qatari-funded Al Jazeera media network inside Israel.
Al Jazeera reporters have harmed Israel's security and incited against Israeli soldiers. It's time to remove the mouthpiece of Hamas from our country.
The premier saying operations would be halted until the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza ends. Al Jazeera rejects Netanyahu's allegations and insists that impartial and professional media standards have been upheld.
Background of this decision is not professional or journalistic things, it's political things, because at least Prime Minister Netanyahu and his far-right government that he is leading in Israel, they're looking all the time how to have benefits.
Israeli television providers suspended Al Jazeera broadcasts soon after the decision.
We believe this is an attack on press freedom. It is a way of trying to deter Al Jazeera, trying to block our coverage from inside Israel.
The decision has not come without condemnations. UN Secretary General spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric condemning any decision to roll back freedom of the press, and the Foreign Press Association in Israel calling the move a dark day for democracy, and the controversial network vowing to continue covering the war, despite the shutdown.
But for now, the coverage will continue. We are not able to operate there, but we have other kind of methods to news gathering.
Also adding that Al Jazeera plans to pursue legal action.
So a dark day for the press. That's how some of the international organisations have described it. But it's interesting to notice the parallels with Europe, which has banned Russia Today for many years now.
Well, I think that was the right decision at the wrong time. to close down Al Jazeera offices in Israel. Well, in principle, I'm against. I'm in favor of free speech and free media, and to allow them to prosper. However, Al Jazeera is a problematic station. It has an extensive, very wealthy, extensive coverage all over the world, which is professional. But when it comes to sensitive issues for Qatar, then it's a mouthpiece of Qatar, and they forgot their professionalism and their need to be balanced. But the timing was bad because Israel needs Qatar for the negotiations. And
Qatar, which of course is still hosting Hamas.
And the Hamas and the Qatari leaders are already very frustrated and angry about the Israeli government, and above all about Netanyahu. And that's why they have been leaking documents from the past, how Israel asked them, Netanyahu, the head of Mossad, Yossi Cohen, asked them, please provide the money to Gaza. And they leaked these documents to show that the double standard of Israeli statements.
All right. Yeah. Do you think it could backfire, though, this move?
No, because that's in the DNA of Qatar, that they know how to juggle between all these conflicting interests. They have a base in the United States, but they support the Muslim Brotherhood and Turkey and Hamas. And because of the strength and power of Al Jazeera, they feel that they can, they have an influence in oversized influence.
Yossi Melman, thank you. Stay with us. We're going to take a short break. Don't go away.
story must reach the whole world. The I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds.
De la frontière qui sépare Israël.
The state of emergency and war in Israel.
Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels. now on Hot.
Welcome back, and let's turn our attentions to the north of Israel now, where 2 people were hurt when the Iranian-backed terrorist organisation Hezbollah sent an explosive-laden drone into the town of Metula. The town has been completely deserted for the past 7 months. Yesterday, Hezbollah fired dozens of missiles at the northern border towns, including Kiryat Shmona, which took several direct hits. Our Balir Sladin is in Kiryat Shmona for us now. And Balir, there has been some serious attacks over the past 24 hours from Lebanon.
Yes, it all happened when 4 civilians in southern Lebanon were killed in an Israeli airstrike. And what we've seen in the past 24 hours is a major escalation from Hezbollah's side. The main incident today was the attack in Metula. What we know about it is that 2 people were wounded. We still can't tell whether we're talking about civilians or soldiers. Of course, that will be confirmed after the IDF or the military in general, of course, confirmed that if that was the case. But there were 2 drones. One of them was actually intercepted by an aircraft, a fighter jet, and the other one was exploded apparently in Metula. Thus, 2 people were wounded as a result of that. And also in the past minute, Hezbollah is announcing that they targeted again today Arab al-Aramshe. They call it Harabat Yarin, which is right in the Israeli-Lebanese border. That's happening after an Israeli airstrike was in Sirbin in southern Lebanon. Apparently, there was no casualties as a result of that. We're talking about one building, one house, they are saying, that was targeted in that airstrike, but no casualties as a result of that particular Israeli airstrike. So we're seeing lots of escalation from Hezbollah's side. That's happening while we were witnessing during the night major attack also from the Israeli side deep inside Lebanon in Baalbek, and later on during the day 15 buildings that belong to Radwan, the elite unit of Hezbollah, were targeted also by the Israeli Air Force during this day. So coming back to this escalation that the mediators, or let's call them the international efforts, has been trying to contain in the past couple of weeks. We've seen some relative calm during the weekend, but here we go again with the tit for tat between the 2 sides and the major escalation that we are seeing lately. Again, this all started when yesterday 4 civilians, according to Lebanese reports, of course, were killed in an Israeli airstrike.
All right, Balir, thank you very much indeed. Balir Sladin there in the north of Israel, where there has been a significant uptick in attacks from Hezbollah since yesterday. With me in the studio, Yossi Melman is an intelligence and defence commentator and the co-author of the book Spies Against Armageddon. Thanks for staying with us. Yossi, here we are then 7 months on. Most of these big towns in the north of Israel are completely deserted, being fired on daily by mortars and missiles and all the rest of it. People can't go home. You know, does the government, talk about the government not having a plan for Gaza, does it have any plan for dealing with Hezbollah?
Because it is linked. And I think we have said it here on this program many, many times. As long as there is a war in Gaza, Hezbollah will not stop firing and shelling northern Israel. And they are doing it on a daily basis. Israel is responding in measure, but much stronger and harsher. But it doesn't change the situation, the reality there. And as long as there is no ceasefire in Gaza, the war with Hezbollah will continue. And the Israelis who've been evacuated, 55,000, 60,000, who live now in hotels around the country, would not be able to return to their homes. And once they return, a great deal of work will be required in order to rebuild their houses. I mean, the scenes that are coming from the northern communities along the border, like Metula and Manara and other rural communities, are terrible. Many houses have been either completely destroyed or very seriously damaged.
And just like the communities in the south, who for years complained that they were being targeted by rockets, the communities in the north were also complaining to the government that Hezbollah was moving closer and closer to the border. This has just been left to fester, hasn't it, for many years?
Yes, but there is a link. I mean, if I understand it, and I assume you understand it, I think that this Israeli government has to understand it, that all these problems have to be solved simultaneously. All these issues have to come to an end simultaneously. We can talk also about Iran and about Yemen and Syria. All these chains are linked. It's simple as that.
The response from Israel's allies in the West seems to be negotiate, find a settlement, push them back to a certain point, reach a deal with Hamas on the hostages. It seems to be telling Israel it must negotiate with these groups. Can you negotiate with Iranian-backed terrorist groups?
Yes, because in the past it happened. Israel has been negotiating either about prisoner swaps with Hezbollah, and one shouldn't remember.
One shouldn't go back home in Metula. Would you go and live in Metula now when you know Hezbollah is there waiting to do October?
No, but if there is a settlement, if there is an agreement, we know that Hezbollah knows how to keep his word. They have been doing it for 17 years, since the last war of 2006. The northern Israel was calm, tranquil, and quiet, and therefore, of course, now the mistrust is growing. Can we trust Hezbollah? It's a big question. But if there is a ceasefire, and if there is an internationally sponsored deal, then I believe Hezbollah will honor it.
All right, we're just getting some reports in from Al Jazeera, funnily enough, which is saying that Hamas has agreed to an Egyptian-Qatari proposal. Any more details on that? I'm just getting that in my ear right now.
Well,
I mean, earlier in the day, a Qatari newspaper, of course, was saying that Hamas had walked away from the deal. So we'll wait and get more detail on all of that. I just want to bring in, talking about the broader conflict with Iran and its proxies. Of course...
no, but it's interesting to talk about this report, because we have heard such report in the past as well. So until there is a concrete evidence that there is an agreement, and there will be at least the first phase of the hostages swap and release, then we will believe it.
It would be better just to stop talking about these endless reports, because Hamas has been doing this, as you say, for many months. I just want to bring in, the war with Iran and its proxies. Of course, Saudi Arabia is watching closely. Analysts say if Israel fails to defeat Hamas, it will be less attractive as a prospective partner in the region for Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's come out with a strong statement in the last hour, warning Israel against targeting Rafah as part of what it called a bloody and systematic campaign to storm areas of Gaza and displace its citizens. So a very strong statement from Riyadh.
Well, it's once again the double standard, or the contradictions, or the gap, which we were talking while referring to Jordan. The Saudi Arabia leadership and the top echelon of the military and the intelligence are against Hamas, no doubt about it. I can tell you very briefly an anecdote of the 2006 war. The Saudis complained that Israel ended the war with Hezbollah, because they wanted to see Hezbollah being defeated and destroyed. And the same is about Hamas.
Which is the exact opposite of what the Americans were saying in 2006, because famously the Americans told Israel, OK, that's enough now.
But 2006 was different, because there was a stronger Lebanese government. Now Hezbollah and the government is the same. But Saudi Arabia, for face saving, cannot go publicly and say we want to see the end of Hamas, but they are ready to see the end of Hamas through diplomatic solution, through a negotiated solution, by bringing more international force into Gaza, and replacing Hamas first of all as a government, and secondly as a military force.
What international force is going to want to go into Gaza when Hamas is still there? They'll just be dead meat, won't they?
No, it would be much more difficult for Hamas.
It fired on UN officials.
It would be much more for Hamas to kill Muslim soldiers or Arab soldiers who are patrolling the streets of Gaza.
Let's not forget Yahya Sinwar was in jail for murdering Palestinians.
Yeah, but that's different.
Okay.
That's different.
All
I
right.
mean, I'm sure they are still killing his own brothers, whom they consider as collaborators.
Egyptian soldiers, killing Saudis, killing Emiratis.
It's different if you mess with the Egyptians or with the Saudis or with Malaysia or Indonesia, which if they send forces to the regions, it's different.
Okay, Yossi, thank you. All right, well, the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog has arrived in Tehran. Rafael Grossi is meeting with Iran's foreign policy and nuclear chiefs and will speak at Iran's first conference on nuclear energy. The IAEA has criticised Tehran for failing to cooperate. A recent leaked report says that Iran's estimated stockpile of enriched uranium has now reached 27 times the limit set out in the 2015 nuclear deal. Jason Brodsky is policy director at the group United Against a Nuclear Iran, and he's with us now. Jason, thanks for being with us. Should we be encouraged by this visit? Does this suggest that Iran is still, in some small way, at least speaking and cooperating with the international community?
Well, it's great to be with you, Laura. I think that this visit is really going to be like all other visits. The IAEA is attempting to monitoring for the public. However, I think the Islamic Republic had two objectives during his visit. One is to use the Director General as a prop during its international nuclear conference to legitimize its nuclear program. And secondly, to try to agree to another joint statement or roadmap that will lead inevitably to nowhere, as so many have led to in the past. And this is all in a bid to buy time and stall ahead of the next IAEA Board of Governors meeting in June.
It's somewhat surreal, isn't it, to see Iran hosting a nuclear energy conference in the city of Natanz, which, of course, is where it is producing most of its uranium.
Well, right. It's producing in Isfahan. That's correct. That's where the conference is going to be held. And again, the symbolism is important to the Islamic Republic for propaganda and other matters. So that is why it values the attendance of the IAEA Director General to bless its program.
What do we know then about how advanced Iran's nuclear program is right now, and what is being done to try and limit it?
Well, I think we are in a situation where there is policy disorientation over Iran's nuclear program. The president is not interested in engaging in a very public diplomatic track with the Islamic Republic ahead of a presidential election in November 2024. And it's unclear what the strategy is moving forward, because let's remember the snapback sanctions mechanism under UN Security Council Resolution 2231, which endorsed the original Iran nuclear deal, expires in October 2025, only months after the next American president inaugurated. So we're in a holding pattern, and it's unclear as to what the road ahead is.
And of course, European countries have shied away from putting sanctions on the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, even as the British and the French stepped in to shoot down Iranian missiles fired at Israel not so long ago. Do you think we're going to see a shift in policy anytime soon?
Unfortunately, I'm pessimistic in that regard. I think that Europe is very afraid to sanction the IRGC as a terrorist organization because they don't want to eliminate the ability to speak with Iranian representatives. But I think that European officials need to ask themselves what added value have those conversations brought for European security. And I would argue they haven't achieved much, because European nationals are still being stabbed in the streets of London, like Pouria Zarati was at Iran International only several weeks ago, all while we have these open diplomatic channels. So the added value remains to be seen.
Jason, thank you very much. Always good to talk to you. Jason Brodsky there.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
And we have got some news in, as I mentioned earlier, a leading Hamas source has told the Qatari news network Al Jazeera that they are willing to agree to that ceasefire proposal. Do we think that there might be some hope of a deal here?
Well, according to Al Jazeera, which was closed down.
We can't watch now.
Well, yeah, that it's the statement by Ismail Haniyeh, who is the chairman of Hamas, the head of their political bureau, and he's in Qatar. So it seems now that it's more serious than it was 2 days ago when the same reports were coming from Qatar, from Egypt, and from Hamas, that they are very inches close to a deal. It seems to me that now it's a little bit more serious, but it still remains to be seen.
Last time around, it was said that the images of Palestinians streaming out of the towns in the north is what put the pressure on Hamas. That is the last thing they want their people to see, because that is a sign of weakness.
I would agree with you that the scenes of people fleeing Rafah and the threat of Israel that they would enter with ground forces into Rafah may have changed the mind of Hamas leaders. Plus the tremendous pressure that Egypt and Qatar and the United States is putting on them. One shouldn't forget also that the CIA chief is now in Israel, and he came from. He was in Cairo. He traveled to Doha, and now he's in Tel Aviv. By the way, I would be very, very curious to know how many hours the head of the CIA, director of CIA, has spent to try to convince these hard heads in the Middle East to come into some sort of understanding.
Well, let's hope that we might just see some hostages home soon. I think that's what everybody in this country is praying for. Thank you very much indeed. Yossi Melman,
thank you.
With us. Well, to other news now. The United States is warning of an impending large-scale massacre in Sudan. The warnings centre on the city of El Fasher. That's a major humanitarian hub in the Darfur region. The RSF militia and its allies reportedly already have razed multiple villages, killing people just west of the city. Well, with us now, Monim Haroun is an advocacy and partnership specialist at Hayas Israel. Thank you very much for being with us, Monim. And I mean, this is a very stark warning, isn't it? And we know that people in Darfur are already suffering near famine conditions, and they're now braced for a possible offensive from the RSF.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for covering this critical crisis. Before I address your question, I wanted to emphasize that we are talking about the worst crisis on the planet currently, but unfortunately is receiving very little attention. We're speaking about over 15,000 people have been killed so far, over 30 million people on urgent humanitarian need, and over 8 million people have been displaced, or about 4 million of them have been children. So yes, the situation in Sudan generally and in Darfur specifically is extremely concerning. And the report you just mentioned, it shows like it could be a turning point for two reasons. One is the humanitarian crisis that could became after this attack, if this attack will happen, because Al-Fasher city has been relatively a safe city for a while now, has been the only city that wasn't impacted by the conflict between the warring parties, and that led hundreds of thousands of people to come to seek refuge in that city. And if the city became unsafe and the situation escalated there, we will have hundreds of thousands of people in an urgent humanitarian situation. The second is that the conflict might not be only between RSF and the Sudanese armed forces, but might involve more rebel forces that were not involved in the conflict before, and that could lead to more circles of violence in Darfur, and that might lead also to an ethnic crisis within Darfur and Sudan in general.
Well, 4 million displaced children, that is an eye-watering number. And as you say, that is not getting any international attention at all. Talk us how this links to what's happening in Chad, which is next door to Sudan and was recently subject to a military coup. What's happening? What is the link there?
Yeah, so far, Chad has been very welcoming for refugees, especially refugees from Darfur, and is currently hosting about 1 million refugees from Darfur. Some of them have been as a result of the violence and the conflict back then in 2003, and about 500,000 of them have been recently arrived into Chad as a result of the ongoing conflict in Sudan. But Chad is going over an elections, and the situation is not clear how stable is it will be in Chad after the election and during the election. And that might lead also, the instability in Chad might lead also to further deteriorating the crisis of refugees in Chad. And just to mention that the situation of refugees in Sudanese refugees in Chad is dire. There is almost total lack of basic needs, food, water, shelters. I was recently in Chad in a mission by Hayas, as we have a mission, an office in Chad, providing vital services for refugees in Chad. And the situation there is literally heartbreaking. As I just mentioned, there is almost a total lack of basic needs. And if the situation in Chad became unstable, that means there will be a huge consequences on the refugee situation.
Monim, we have to. I'm really sorry, Monim. We were out of time. I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. We appreciate it. Monim Haroun.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Now, today is Yom HaShoah, Israel's national day of commemoration for the victims of the Holocaust, the first, of course, since the October 7th massacre, which was the deadliest single day for Jews since the Holocaust, and Holocaust survivors and their descendants were among the victims of the massacre. The Fahud pogrom in Baghdad in 1941 was inspired by the Nazis. An 85-year-old Shlomo Mansour, who survived that, is among the 132 hostages right now being held in Gaza. Well, my next guest works to promote Holocaust awareness in the Gulf. Eitan Nashlos is the ambassador of the March of the Living Gulf chapter. Thank you for being with us, Eitan. Thanks for joining us. And anti-Semitism has surged dramatically since October 7th all around the world. Is that also the reality in the UAE where you are?
Thank you, Laura, for having me and for your viewers' interest. Let me start by saying that I'm a very proud Israeli citizen and a very proud resident of Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. And here I embrace the spirit of the Abraham Accord economically, culturally, and I do so safely as a Jew. And I really take example from the leadership who value and implement tolerance, including through a ministry of tolerance. What follows abroad since October 7th, which is the most heinous rise in global anti-Semitism across US campuses and desecration of synagogues and cemeteries in Europe and Jews attacked just for being Jewish, here in the United Arab Emirates, we are safe. And the last Passover, Jews prayed at the Abraham family house, which is gifted from the leadership of the United Arab Emirates and symbolizes tolerance and coexistence, a synagogue, a mosque, and a church side by side. This is the echo of safety, of humanity, of tolerance, and of compassion that we are experiencing here in the United Arab Emirates.
And Eitan, there's been an active effort by Israel's enemies to deny what happened on October 7th or just downplay it. There are echoes of Holocaust denial there, aren't there?
Let me start by saying that I visited Kfar Aza in the south of Israel, and I bear witness to the worst atrocity committed against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. There is no room for denial, and I stood alongside the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Erdan. I stood by General Almog as we stood by family members of hostages who provided testimony at Congress in Washington. And this issue is also very close to my heart because I have led the campaign together with March of the Living and Auschwitz Foundation to restore the children's shoes at Auschwitz as vital testimony. But let me say this to you. Whilst we see the echoes of denial and distortion and tokenization, we also see the echoes of righteousness. And let us remember today, on Yom HaShoah, International Holocaust Remembrance Day, the 28,000 righteous amongst the nations, Christians, Muslims alike, have shown us what compassion looks like. And I remember the Chodasevich family, a righteous Christian, devout family who saved my grandmother and paid the ultimate price when they were murdered at gunpoint while holding their 6-month-old baby. As Jews, we do not stand alone in the face of such denials. We also see such righteousness today, those who are uniting for peace, tolerance, and coexistence. And my message here today is, let us unite globally and be a righteous generation. And in unison, always declare that never means never in Hebrew or Lam La'od.
Wise words indeed, Eitan. Thank you very much indeed. Eitan Nashlos there, and we'll leave it there. Stay tuned. Kalev Ben David will be with you next.
Tel Aviv is ranked the happiest city in the world and the best place to own a home. For 3 generations, the Ben Shalom family has built boutique apartment buildings in the most desirable locations. From restoration in historical locales to homes along Park HaYarkon, Ben Shalom is a one-stop shop from start to finish and friends for life.
Live. Yeah. Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. It is day 213 of Israel at war. And today the IDF initiated the first steps in its planned offensive into Rafah by urging Palestinian civilians in the city's eastern half to evacuate to safe zones set up in the north and west. The long-awaited Israel push into the last Hamas stronghold in Gaza came after the deadly rocket strike on the Kerem Shalom crossing killed 4 IDF soldiers, Sergeants Ruben Asulin, Ido Tester, Tal Shavit, and Michael Ruzel, and wounded 10 more. Now, the attack initially did seem to derail final steps towards a hostage deal. But just moments ago, a dramatic announcement from the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh saying that the terror group has finally accepted the most recent hostage deal proposal. This after the CIA Director William Burns arrived in Israel and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke by phone with U.S. President Joe Biden. Meanwhile, in northern Israel, 2 people were seriously wounded by explosive drones launched from South Lebanon, with the IDF responding with cross-border attacks on Hezbollah targets. But the main military focus today is fixated on Gaza's southernmost city of Rafah, as the IDF sets the stage for delivering a decisive blow against Hamas. More in this report from Robert Swift.
The Israeli military is directing residents in some areas of Rafah to evacuate. By text message, airdrop flyers, and phone calls, the IDF instructed an estimated 100,000 people to move from the southern Gazan city, Hamas's last major stronghold. Some appeared to be following the instructions, which directed them to an expanded area designated by Israel as a humanitarian zone. Israel has faced months of international pressure not to enter Rafah, due to fears over the impact on the roughly 2 million people sheltering there. But Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant told his U.S. counterpart Lloyd Austin that Jerusalem was left with no choice but to act following a Hamas rocket attack close to the Kerem Shalom crossing on Sunday, which killed 4 Israeli soldiers and wounded 9 others.
We recognise alarming signs that Hamas actually does not intend to follow any agreement with us. This means action in Rafah and the entire Gaza Strip in the near future.
The IDF said that its shaping actions are for a limited operation in specific areas of Rafah. But with Hamas and the Israeli government refusing to cede ground in ceasefire negotiations, the likelihood of a large-scale battle over the southern city is growing.
Let's go down to the Israel-Gaza border. We're joined by phone by our correspondent, Zach Anders. Zach, I understand you had to remove your location because of safety concerns. I was going to start. We're going to speak about the Rafah operation. Just in the last few moments, a dramatic announcement, though, from Hamas, from Ismail Haniyeh, the leader, saying that they are accepting the most recent proposal, which could have an immediate impact on what is going on right across the border from you in Rafah.
That's exactly right, Kalev. But that just because we're getting this major headline that's coming across the news, and I'm sorry, we're going to have a tank that's driving right past me. I'm losing you probably with the sound for a moment. It's still very active down here. And within the moment that we did get that notice from these early reports suggesting they've accepted the ceasefire, there has still been airstrikes and there continues to still be outgoing artillery hitting the areas of eastern Rafah. So to every, and there's just another massive, 2 massive, 3 massive explosions and a fireball that shot into the sky there. And we're watching this now. There's no indication that that this ceasefire has led to any let up in the amount of military activity that we've seen in eastern Rafah in the last several hours.
All right. And you wouldn't expect it, though, because literally this announcement just came in moments ago. I don't know that you would expect it to have such quick impact on what's happening in the field. Zach Anders, take care there on the border of Israel and Gaza. Joining me in studio, Yaakov Lapin, military and strategic affairs analyst at the Miriam Institute and for the Jewish News Syndicate in Alba Center, and Yaki Dayan, the former Israeli consul in Los Angeles. And gentlemen, just again to clarify, just moments ago, really two reports, two announcements. One directly from Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader, saying he's informed the Qatari Prime Minister and the Chief of Egyptian Intelligence, two key figures in negotiations, that Hamas has accepted that ceasefire proposal, which calls for the release, as far as we know, the last terms, the release of 33 hostages for something like a 6-week ceasefire. And Al Jazeera also saying that report. I have to say some unofficial reports, not from official sources, saying that Hamas received some kind of assurances from some officials saying that that ceasefire would extend to a permanent truce, something, of course, Israel that has never agreed to. Yaakov, what do we make of what's happening right now?
It's clear that Hamas wants to stop those Israeli tanks from moving in on its last stronghold.
Which we've just heard is happening right now with those airstrikes on Rafah.
Airstrikes are preparatory, but the large ground maneuvering hasn't begun. And they would give at least, a week and a half for the 100,000 or so civilians to leave eastern Rafah. Right. But Hamas saw the wheels beginning to turn. It saw that Israel was serious. And then it produced basically the only tool it has left in its toolbox to stop this operation, which is to accept the deal. Now, we have to see whether Hamas is serious. We have to see whether this is a verifiable offer by Hamas and that it's not some false attempt, misleading attempt to manipulate Israel into stopping its operation.
Right, a stalling tactic.
A stalling tactic. But if it's a serious offer by Hamas, then the Israeli War Cabinet will have no choice but to examine it seriously. And if there is an opportunity to get hostages out, Israel will have to take that opportunity and stall the war temporarily. I do think that it's critical that if Hamas does accept this ceasefire proposal, that it's made clear by Israel that this is a temporary ceasefire, because that clause calling for a permanent end to the war, which Hamas has insisted on, has been the reason until now for the failure of every single round of negotiations. And so if Israel makes it clear that nothing has changed as far as it's concerned, the proposal stands, and if Hamas is willing to accept that, then there is a reason to be optimistic, but we're not there yet. We have to verify the situation.
Right, and Yaki, some maybe tough decisions ahead for Prime Minister Netanyahu, who did release a statement just today refuting reports that the Israel and personally he himself was an impediment to making to stopping a deal from going forward. How should, on the political level, how should Prime Minister Netanyahu be handling this latest report?
Yeah, I would say a few things. We should take with a grain of salt the Hamas announcement. But my immediate conclusion is we should have done Rafah a while ago, because definitely it puts Hamas under pressure. And we see the announcement by Haniyeh and others. But nevertheless, the hostages, releasing the hostages and a hostage deal is the most important and urgent thing. And I think that if it is under the conditions that were agreed by Israel and the negotiators, the United States, Qatar, and Egypt, then Israel should go with that. But I'm saying that there are three major conditions that Israel has to put on the table. The first thing is, there is another target to this war, and this is dismantling the Hamas abilities, military and administrative capabilities. This is something that Israel has to demand. So even though there is a deal, that's the first thing. The second is the Philadelphia corridor and the Rafah passage are still widely open, and Hamas can enter lots of goods and military capabilities from there.
From Sinai.
From Sinai. So Israel has to insist that should be included. And the third thing, and we have to connect the two together, is if the Hezbollah stops the fire due to a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel,
which it did it during the previous.
Exactly. Then this is not enough for Israel, because if we want to bring bring back the refugees, the Israeli refugees, back to their homes, we should insist that Hezbollah would be pushed back at least 10 kilometers from the border. So those are three conditions that without them, you cannot have a full cessation of war. You can have a ceasefire, but not a complete cessation of war.
You know, Yaakov, as I mentioned before, Bill Burns, the CIA director, arriving in Israel today, a conversation reportedly, because there's been no officials readouts of it, of a conversation between Prime Minister Netanyahu and U.S. President Joe Biden. Those reports that the Biden administration has froze the latest arms shipment to Israel, an issue of great concern to Israel. The question is that if in some way the U.S. has given some kind of assurances delivered to Hamas via the mediators, how Israel is going to handle that? How is it going to negotiate, making the points that Yaki just said, while at the same time maintaining that relationship with the U.S., continue receiving those arms shipments, which is going to need, if it's going to have to, for example, follow up with some kind of military action in the north against Hezbollah.
So we actually saw the Biden administration coming under fire domestically by Republicans in recent hours over reports of that freeze. I think the freeze it would be just that. I don't think the administration could actually stop the flow, but it can definitely delay under excuses of, logistical problems. That is very concerning. However, I don't think that Israel's core security interests should be decided upon by threats, even if it's one from our closest ally. There's nobody who's going to look after Israel's core security interests except Israel. And Rafah, this comes back to your first question, how do we ensure that Hamas doesn't operate on false assumptions that the war is over, simply by stating it, which Israel has been doing actually quite clearly, that it doesn't matter what any mediators would like to think, the war will not be over. This is a ceasefire. This is a temporary ceasefire. This has been Israel's position since the beginning of negotiations.
I would add to that, one of the mistakes that the Americans have done through the negotiations on the hostage deal is that they all the time demanded ceasefire from the Israelis. But at the same time, they haven't requested to demilitarize Gaza, to make sure that the terrorists are going out from Gaza, dismantling Hamas. That should have been put on the same level as asking from Israel a ceasefire, because the demand is from Israel for a ceasefire, but what are the demands from Hamas? And the basic thing is to demilitarize the Gaza Strip.
All right. Now, gentlemen, as you mentioned, the North, what's happening in the North is a big equation in terms of whether there'll be a ceasefire and a hostage deal. And we did see some serious action there along the northern border. Let's go to our correspondent, Balir Sladin, who is in northern Israel. And Balir, again, we're seeing fire come, cross-border fire, Israelis injured. And yet all of this may be impacted by this dramatic news just in the last few moments of Hamas talking about saying they're accepting a ceasefire, because we did see the last time there was a ceasefire in Gaza, that also played out there in the north.
Yes, exactly. And that's what Hezbollah is saying over again in the past few months. When Hamas or when Israel actually ceases fire in Gaza, there will be a ceasefire here, because after all, this is only a support front, as they are calling it, and not a front that they are willing or they are aiming to continue attacking Israel if there's no war in Gaza. If the war in Gaza ends, the war also, the conflict here, or the hostilities here, if we can call it this way, will end as well. Now, today, a main incident that we can talk about happened in Metula, and this is the continuation of the escalation that we've been seeing throughout the 24 hours, the past 24 hours, that started when 4 civilians, according to Lebanese reports, of course, have been killed in southern Lebanon yesterday by an Israeli airstrike. Today in Metula, 2 drones were fired from southern Lebanon. One of them was intercepted by an Israeli fighter jet. The other one exploded inside Metula. Apparently, 2 people were wounded as a result of that. We can't say for now if it's a civilian or a soldier that was wounded. Of course, we will know later on when the military reveals that. But for now, we know that the escalation is continuing also from the past hour. One more announcement from Hezbollah, the third for today. They are saying that they targeted Arab al-Aramshi with rockets. That's happening after Israel also targeted Serbin in the past couple of hours. So we're seeing that the tit-for-tat combat between the two is continuing, and this is happening while in the background the continuous international effort, especially by the French lately, to contain this escalation. No one knows, or no one hopes that the escalation or the hostilities will actually stop at any point before, of course, there's a ceasefire in Gaza, but at least to contain the escalation that we've been seeing throughout the past couple of weeks. And the French are trying to propose a 3 phases again proposal that Hezbollah needs to accept. The Lebanese government already accepted that. The Israelis, of course, are willing to discuss it, but Hezbollah is saying unless there is a ceasefire in Gaza, we will continue supporting, as they are saying, the resistance in Gaza.
All right, Balia Sladin there in northern Israel. Thank you for that. Gentlemen, there are some reactions now coming out of Israeli officials through local media. One Israeli official cited as saying, well, we will examine the statements by Hamas, but expressing skepticism that Hamas has truly accepted the version of the ceasefire deal that Israel gave its okay to. And that would include, of course, the fact that Israel has repeatedly refused to give any kind of guarantee that it will cease its military operation in the Gaza Strip and pull back its troops. One Israeli official say this is just another game by Hamas to try to make it look like Israel is the one that is being obstinate here, and is just an attempt to basically stall time.
Listen, the Hamas demanded all the time for the last 7 months 2 things. One is that Israel will have a complete cessation of war, the end of war. That's the first thing. And the second thing is the withdrawal of the IDF forces from Gaza. If indeed they changed their position and they are not demanding the end of war and nor the withdrawal of the Israeli army from Gaza, then the deal is on the table. The question if it's just some kind of drill that they are.
But Yaki, the question, and Yaakov, the question is if basically Israel says, okay, we're going to agree to phase 1 of the hostage deal, but that will have no bearing on Israel continuing its military operation, and Hamas saying, okay, we'll do phase 1. But that's because we've received assurances that Israel will withdraw its forces and basically extend this into a full-time truce. Yeah. Are those the conditions by which we could see the phase 1 of this hostage deal be carried out and the release of 33 hostages?
That's a dangerous scenario because that would see Hamas essentially try to recruit everybody against Israel so that when the end of stage 1 occurs, according to Hamas's plans in this scenario, everybody, including the United States, would come down on Israel and say, no, don't renew the war. This is going so well. How can you renew the war now? And they're kind of sort of, trying to just push everybody into the dynamics that they want to see happen. So that is a dangerous scenario, and Israel has to think very carefully about how to proceed in that kind of scenario.
But there are those gentlemen, and certainly we'll be hearing it from the hostage families and their supporters that, yes, even if that is the condition under which Israel, even under a bad faith agreement that's worth getting out,
but Yaakov is touching a very good point. I think that the Hamas wants to see the end of war, but not less the Americans wants to see the end of the war. Right. So if you are going to the first phase and completing the first phase, the Americans, as much as the others, but even more than the others, will push Israel for the end of the war. And this is something which you cannot accept. So if phase 1 stand alone, and you can do that, and the Americans understands that's the main thing. And the Americans understands that the other conditions, dismantling Hamas, Philadelphia corridor, Hezbollah, all of those above have to be fulfilled. Then you can go to phase 1 with the American assurances. But if the Americans have a master plan, which is you have first phase 1, but then it is a must to move to phase 2 without completing those conditions, then we have a big problem.
Exactly right, and that would actually turn the Americans, not because of their desire, but because of Hamas's machinations, into a proxy for Hamas in negotiations, which would be a very negative scenario, and we have to be very careful about that.
All right. Well, again, there are things that may have been discussed, but behind closed doors or behind closed phone lines between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden, which they may, for political reasons, not make public, and there's going to be a lot of speculation. We'll just have to see the statements that come out.
They're saying that out of the telephone call, the end or the acceptance of Hamas of the deal was not raised.
Was not raised, yes. So perhaps it came as a surprise to them. We're just going to have to see what develops in the next couple hours. We're going to be very cautious because in this studio, we've said many times before, we're going to it looks like a hostage deal, and of course there were disappointments being raised. Well, let's look at one element that has arisen just this week, a complication to this whole scenario, and that is the Israeli government's controversial decision to shut down, at least temporarily, Al Jazeera's operations inside Israel. Now, the Qatari-backed news network is saying this will not stand in its way. It's in its reporting on the Israel-Hamas war, and it is mounting a legal challenge to the decision. Chana Rifkin has the story.
A contentious decision by Israel's Netanyahu government on Sunday over what it deems as harmful media coverage by the Qatari-funded Al Jazeera media network inside Israel.
Al Jazeera reporters have harmed Israel's security and incited against Israeli soldiers. It's time to remove the mouthpiece of Hamas from our country.
The premier saying operations would be halted until the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza ends. Al Jazeera rejects Netanyahu's allegations and insists that impartial and professional media standards have been upheld.
Background of this decision is not professional or journalistic things, it's political things, because at least Prime Minister Netanyahu and his far-right government that he is leading in Israel, they're looking all the time how to have benefits.
Israeli television providers suspended Al Jazeera broadcasts soon after the decision.
We believe this is an attack on press freedom. It is a way of trying to deter Al Jazeera, trying to block our coverage from inside Israel.
The decision has not come without condemnations. UN Secretary General spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric condemning any decision to roll back freedom of the press, and the Foreign Press Association in Israel calling the move a dark day for democracy, and the controversial network vowing to continue covering the war, despite the shutdown.
But for now, the coverage will continue. We are not able to operate there, but we have other kind of methods to news gathering.
Also adding that Al Jazeera plans to pursue legal action.
And Yaki, Israel facing criticism about that decision, and even some within Israel are wondering about the wisdom of shutting down Al Jazeera.
So there is a very simple answer to that. I'm not speaking about the Saudis that closed Al Jazeera a while ago, because then people might say this is not a democracy and all of that. But go to the EU. They closed so many Russian channels. The RT, the EU decided to close those channels because of propaganda, exactly the reason why Al Jazeera is being shut down. And the Americans now dealt with the TikTok in a way, moving it from Chinese hands into American hands. So when there is a propaganda, you have to fight it, and especially if it's directed against you. So you have many examples from the Western world, and Israel is following those examples.
All right. I want to move on and just note that today Israel did mark Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, with the country coming to a standstill as it observed a 2-minute moment of silence as sirens rang out at 10 a.m. local time. Memorial events were held across Israel, with many speakers drawing parallels between the Nazi terror and Hamas's murderous pogrom and the subsequent surge of anti-Semitism. Emily Francis attended one Yom HaShoah event at Jerusalem's Friends of Zion Museum and spoke there with Deputy Mayor Flor Hassan Nahum.
We're not just dealing with a regular Holocaust Day event like we do every single year, where we feel the pain of what happened 80 years ago. We're dealing with an unfolding anti-Jewish crisis around the world. It's almost like October 7th in instead of unleashing sympathy and empathy for what the Jewish people went through in the worst massacre since the Holocaust, we saw the very opposite, the Jews being villainized for being the victims. And this is, again, a new wave of anti-Semitism. And so today, the discussion has to be very different. It's not just about remembering the Holocaust and pledging never again. We're seeing that never again has to be now, and we need some concrete actions. What are we going to do about the prevention of the next Holocaust?
And we are, gentlemen, please stay with us. We are going out for a brief break, but we'll have more. We are expecting to hear in the coming moments a briefing from Admiral Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesperson, presumably on events unfolding this evening in Gaza and also along Israel's north. Stay with us. We'll be back after a break.
Story must reach the whole world. The I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds.
De la frontière qui sépare Israël. The state of emergency and war in Israel.
Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels. Now on Hot.
Welcome back to this special broadcast of Israel at War. For 50 days, Noga Weiss was held captive in Gaza until she was released in the first hostage deal last year. Just recently, she detailed some of the abusive treatment she received there, including talking about one Hamas guard who told Weiss he wanted to marry and impregnate her. Well, today, the 18-year-old took a real step in moving ahead with her life, joining the IDF and telling media that, quote, she always wanted to enlist and dedicate myself to the country. Well, good luck with your service, Noga. Now, dramatic news, perhaps this evening for the remaining hostages in Gaza and their families. Of course, Israel beginning its operations on Rafah, and this announcement apparently by Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, that it accepts the most recent offer for a hostage deal. And as we reported earlier, the CIA Director William Burns was in Israel today to try to get a deal back on track. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today pushing back on reports he was trying to delay a deal, saying in a statement, quote, Hamas is the one that sabotages any deal by not moving 1 millimeter from its extreme demands that no Israeli government could accept, primarily that Israel withdraw from Gaza and end the war. Well, for more, we are now joined by Gal Gilboa Dalal. He's a survivor himself of the Nova Music Festival. Unfortunately, his younger brother, Guy, was kidnapped there by Hamas on October 7th, and he joins us from Herzliya. And of course, Gal, we've spoken to you before about your experiences, your concerns for your brother. I just want to get your response to this latest news this evening. I know it's a roller coaster, an emotional roller coaster. Now we're hearing a possibility, when all seemed lost, that Hamas may accept the most recent proposal. So I just want to get your response to how it's dealing with this, as I said before, almost kind of roller coaster of news and emotions.
Thank you for having me. And, a lot of people reach me to get my response for what just going on. And, the first thing I did, it was to open the TV and see what there's in the news and reading what there is in the internet. And on the first thing I noted that maybe something is going on. And, I'm so hopeful to reach to any kind of deal that will bring the hostages back. That's all I want. But on the same, after a few minutes later, I already hearing that our government saying that the deal was changed. It's not the same deal that they, agreed on. And it's hard. I don't really know anything about anything more other than what I hear in the news. And, I try not to think about it too much until I hear something is approved by both sides, because it's hard. It is a roller coaster. And, the only thing I really want and I really think about is how I want to have my brother back and how I want this war to end and how I want to go back to peace. And how I want things to go back to how they were. I'm tired. I'm really, really tired of waiting for my brother. I'm desperately want my brother to be back already.
Right. Now, you may have heard in my introduction, Prime Minister Netanyahu did release a statement today saying that, it is Hamas and its unwillingness to compromise on its maximalist demands that's responsible here. What is your message, given all you've just said, both to the government here in Israel, the international governments that are involved in the negotiations with Hamas, and I guess in some ways to Hamas itself? What is your message to all of those people that are involved in deciding, in a great degree, the fate of your brother and the remaining hostages?
I would say that everyone needs to help to come to a deal that will return everyone, all the hostages. And until we won't get a deal that will return all of them and that will include all the hostages that right now in Hamas hands in Gaza, I don't think that we can allow ourselves to agree to any other deal. Because if we think about the last deal that we agreed and the hostages that have returned, we can see that the hostages that stay there, it just made them stay there for longer. And I don't know if agreeing on a deal that will return only some of the hostages and not all of them will have my brother in it. And you're asking me, and all I think about is my brother. I want to see my brother. I want to have my brother again in my life. And I don't think we can agree on anything that won't return them. But I do believe that if a deal that includes all the hostages is on the table, we have the responsibility to do anything we can to make terms with such a deal.
Right. You do know, you do hear the voices, and there is a debate about this in Israel. Some even relatives of hostages, some with many more with young sons and daughters who are fighting in the IDF and involved there, saying no, even though they may agree in principle with what you're saying the only real answer is just to keep up the pressure, the military pressure on Hamas, keep the Rafah operation until there is a definitive answer for example, from Hamas. So what's your response to that?
There are so many opinions, even in the Family Hostages Forum, where you can see all the families hostages together, trying to show a united front. A lot of different opinions and a lot of, some people really think that military pressure is the only answer to bring Hamas to agree to a deal that will include everyone. Some think that the military pressure need to stop in order to let Hamas to allow Hamas to put the table on the or to put the deal on the table.
Okay, Gal, we will have to end the conversation there. I apologize, but Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesperson, is about to speak, and we do have to take his remarks. They may be important. Let's take a listen.
Mordechai Asulin, First Sergeant Esther and First Sergeant Tal Shavit of blessed memory. 4 Giv'ati and Nachal combat soldiers who fell in battle in Kerem Shalom yesterday near the border with Gaza. They fell because they were hit by mortar shells launched from the Rafah crossing. We would like to strengthen the bereaved families in this tough time, and we will continue to accompany them. The memory of those who have fallen is our compass to continue to fight, especially during these days. This morning, we announced the beginning of the evacuation of the eastern Rafah neighborhoods and expanding the humanitarian area in Muasin and Khan Yunis as part of preparation for a ground operation in this area. Under the instruction of the political echelon, the Israeli Air Force jets have targeted any targets in the Rafah area. And we are calling upon those who are in these areas, which we have defined always on radio, in the media, and online, and also in posters in Eastern Rafah, to move toward the humanitarian area, expanded humanitarian area in Muasi and in Khan Yunis. There they will receive humanitarian aid, water, food, medication, and shelter. Following the shooting yesterday from the Rafah area toward Kerem Shalom, the Kerem Shalom crossing has been shut down for security reasons. As soon as we will be able to do so operationally and security-wise, we will open it. In the last 24 hours, there has been an exchange of fire during the night. Combat jets have targeted military bases in Lebanon, and we have also completed targeting of 20 terror infrastructure buildings of Radwan force in southern Lebanon. A drone from Hezbollah was launched and hit near Metula today. In Judea and Samaria, the IDF forces and ISA have been carrying out an operation to thwart terrorism in Tulkarem. During it, forces are demolishing and destroying terror bombs and factories, and a lot of work has been done in order to thwart a terror squad in Tulkarem. During this operation, an Israeli combat soldier has been injured, and we're still fighting for his life. We are wishing him good health. Tonight, when the National Holocaust Day is ending, today, perhaps more than any other day during the year, it is our right, it is our duty, thanks to the Jewish people and the State of Israel, to defend itself. And tonight I would like us all to remember the Holocaust survivors who have been murdered and kidnapped on October 7th, and those who have survived this atrocious attack. Among them, Shlomo Mansour, who is 86 years old and has survived pogroms in Iraq during the Holocaust and was kidnapped from his home in Kisufim on October 7th. Together with him, 131 hostages who still remain and are still being held cruelly in captivity by Hamas. Today, it is our moral duty to operate and do everything in our power in order to bring them back home as quickly as possible. Questions? Anna Pines, Kan 11. Does Hamas notice or announcement change plans for Rafah? We are prepared. Any answer, any response will be considered very seriously, and we will exhaust any opportunity in negotiation and bringing back the hostages as a main mission, bring them home as quickly as possible. But at the same time, we will continue to take action operationally in the Gaza Strip, and we will continue to do so. Roy Rubinstein, Yediot Achronot. Why was it so urgent to appoint new major generals, such as in human resources and in other areas which are not so urgent? Why not only appoint the head, the commander of the Central Command and the intelligence? Well, we have organized, structured processes in the IDF. They are transparent. They are done in full coordination with the Ministry of Defense. All of these appointments have been approved. We must look forward toward the future, plan for the future. It is the role of the IDF as an army. Of course, we are also at war, but it is our duty, and it is the Chief of General Staff's duty, who is leading us in war, to also engage in these topics. Liran Weinstein, Srugim News. Good evening. I would like to continue talking about the appointments. In the last round of appointments, Brigadier General Winter once again has not been promoted. Why have two chiefs of general staffs, Kochavi and Halev?
All right, gentlemen, just a couple of updates. Israeli sources now say they are studying the proposal, though there's no agreed upon framework yet to actually act on moving ahead with a hostage deal. We did hear Daniel Hagari say that operationally the IDF is continuing in Rafah, urging civilians, which we've seen, Palestinian civilians to leave the Rafah area, at least eastern Rafah, and move north, and Israel continuing its strikes into Rafah that we reported on earlier. But stressing the IDF is prepared for every contingency, including stopping its operations if that's what it gets from the orders it gets from the political level.
Absolutely. The IDF has been ready for this scenario from the beginning of the planning stages for the Rafah operation. They knew that this was a contingency that they had to plan for, that Hamas would try to stop essentially the removal of its human shields to stop the evacuation of Gazan civilians.
And we see them moving.
And we see them moving. Gazan civilians listened to IDF evacuation orders. More than 1 million of them listened to the IDF in Gaza City. They listened when the IDF told them to leave Khan Yunis. Hamas knows that it cannot stop this movement, even when it fires on them, and it does try to fire on them to stop them from evacuating. Hamas does not want to see its human shields stripped away from its leadership and core capabilities in Rafah and the crossings into Egypt, the tunnels. So this is definitely, an attempt by Hamas to stop the entire momentum of the operation. And Israel has no choice. It will have to study this proposal. We'll have to see whether it's serious or not. And then, there are only two ways to go. Either it's going to accept the proposal or it's going to reject. But what's interesting from these comments by the IDF spokesperson is that during this time, as Israel studies the proposal, it's going to continue the military operations. It's not stopping it as it studies the operation. That's an important point.
As it studies the proposal.
The proposal,
All right. I should just note, we're making footage coming out just moments ago from Rafah of Palestinians celebrating in the street the news that Hamas has agreed to a ceasefire, which gives you some idea of maybe the dissonance between the Palestinians there and the Hamas leadership, which has been reluctant to accept the proposal.
Because there are a range of answers that the Hamas could have given. Whether they accepted the deal that was on the table or they softened part of the deal, and then it's a different question, it's a different deal. And as Yaakov said correctly, the IDF has to move to move with their plans on Rafah, as long as they're not getting any other instructions from the government.
All right, and keeping up the pressure, of course.
Exactly.
So it doesn't work as a stalling.
That's the only leverage, and it shows that it works.
All right. Well, let's see. Hopefully, if it does work to the degree that the hostages, some of them are actually released. Let's move now to the United States. After having seen their protest encampments at Columbia University and other New York area colleges taken down by police, pro-Palestinian activists have declared a Day of Rage rally and march in Upper Manhattan today, Day of Rage in New York City. Now, the anti-Israel and certainly in some cases anti-Semitic rallies that are sweeping U.S. campuses are spreading to universities in Europe and elsewhere. For Israeli students and educators, the wave of incitement against the Jewish state has come as something of a sobering shock, an awakening or perhaps reawakening of some of the deepest fears in the Jewish heart. Emmanuel Honorat takes a closer look.
As Israel marks Holocaust Memorial Day, many Israelis are also confronted with new realities. Since the brutal Hamas massacre on October 7, anti-Israel protests have flooded countries and campuses worldwide. But for many, these rallies have little to do with politics. From social media to the university buildings, Israelis have found themselves confronted by a new set of hate, often likened to anti-Semitism.
We see it's happening in the campuses in the US shows us that people don't really understand what happened here in the 7th of October and what's happening ever since. We know that there is a lot of confrontation about the Israeli and the Palestinian confrontation, but what happened in the 7th of October, it's not about that. It's about a massacre that happened that we here in Israel not truly understand. We still cope with it. And to see the students in the campuses, students like us in a parallel universe, seeing and talking about what's happening here as if it was some kind of massacre from us to the people in Gaza, it's truly horrific.
The U.S. isn't the only place plagued by student encampments and mass protests, preventing daily routines and classes from taking place. Just last week, the Paris campuses of prestigious schools, Sciences Po and Sorbonne, were the latest locations making headlines.
I'm a Jewish American Czech student, and I'm concerned, I think, foremost. I think the language that I'm seeing right now, I'm here right now distributing some flyers which are basically explaining that the conflation between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is very harmful to Jewish people and anyone actually that would speak out for the Palestinian cause. And I'm here to express my concern over this conflation, really, because it's harmful. It's being perpetrated by the administration, the staff members privately, and I don't feel like it is a conducive environment to my education anymore as a Jewish student.
For many, criticism of Israel is not off limits, but for those same Israelis, there's a clear line not to be crossed.
So it's very important to make a distinction that not all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism. Okay? You can criticize the government of Israel's policies, you can criticize the Israel Defense Forces and how it's prosecuting the war. This is not anti-Semitism. However, when you start calling for the destruction of the state of Israel, the destruction of the Jewish people, the elimination of the Jewish people, this is anti-Semitism.
With violent images coming out of some of these protests, marking Holocaust Day is taking on a whole new dimension for Israelis.
For more, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, who's there outside Columbia University. And Mike, we've covered many days of rage here in Israel. What's a day of rage in New York City, in Upper Manhattan? What's that going to look like?
Kind of goes against the optics that the pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas supporters out here in New York have tried to portray as the peaceful, almost kumbaya settings of a protest out here. You don't really correlate that with days of rage. There's actually going to be two separate protests out here, one here at Columbia coming up in a couple of hours' time just across the road here, and then one down by Hunter College. They'll merge later on in the day over at Hunter. Has to be noted, though, two things today on the development front. Number one, Columbia University canceled their graduation ceremony, at least the one for the larger community here. They'll have individual college ceremonies, but the big one has been canceled because of all the protests and the aftermath of it. Secondly, there is an event being put on here at Columbia on the edge of campus today by a number of American Jewish and pro-Israel groups to mark Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. Ambassador from the UN, Gilad Erdan, will be there. The newly arrived Consul General for New York, Ophir Okunis, will also be there. It'll be very interesting to see how many of those protesters make their way over to that event today. Could be a little bit dicey coming up here later tonight. One of those Days of Rage protests being run by the Columbia University Apartheid Divestment Organization. The other one Within Our Lifetime, which is a well-known, at least here in the city, pro-Palestinian and oftentimes pro-Hamas group that their rallies, their protests that they participated in have often gotten violent. So police are on full alert. We contacted Columbia Public Safety, also Hunter Public Safety. Both of those departments declined to comment on their plans for this evening to handle those particular protests. An NYPD representative here at Columbia says, quote unquote, it's business as usual, and hopefully it will stay that way.
And Mike, just in the last couple of days, we've seen diverse reactions from schools to these events. We have seen some universities suspend students that have violated what they say is not just campus regulations, but laws, laws of local authorities. We've seen some schools like Northwestern, which we did discuss, basically give concessions and agree to some of the demands of protesters. For example, reviewing investments in Israel or cooperation with Israeli institutions, and some that seem just to be kind of waiting to figure out how they're going to handle this situation.
Definitely, there's been a range of reactions by campus administrators. I don't think anybody is going to accuse any of them of acting rash. Almost all of them waited weeks into these protests to do something, if anything, at this point. The University of Chicago now under fire as a precondition for discussions with the protesters, not even to break up the encampment, but just to sit down and discuss with them the terms of breaking up the protests. The university had to create a Gaza Scholar program in which they would take 8 Gazan scholars into the University of Chicago, fully fund their scholarships and create an accompanying program around there. So definitely a range of reactions so far. We're getting toward the end of the semester now, so I would figure at this point, if they haven't tried to break up the encampments yet, it's probably going to linger into the semester break. The bigger question now is, what's it going to look like in the summer semester? What's it going to look like in the fall semester? I spoke with a student, an Orthodox Jewish student over at NYU a few days ago. I asked her about the offers coming from Jewish universities like Yeshiva, like Brandeis, to take in Jewish students who are afraid to come back onto campus. She told me, listen, we don't want to get into what she called a self-ghettoization of the universities here. They need to feel safe on their campuses and are waiting patiently at this point for university administrators to come up with a game plan for what comes next after these graduation ceremonies take place, or at least here at Columbia don't take place.
Right, and it would be kind of a step backward for Jewish students to have to go to Jewish schools again under the current climate. Mike Wagenheim there at Columbia University. Thank you for that. Gentlemen, you could comment on that, but I do have to update on a couple of developments here. Shows you how things are moving in different directions. Israeli officials now telling local media being very cautious and skeptical about the Hamas proposal. One Israeli official saying that what Hamas agreed to is not the proposal that Israel signed off on, but apparently perhaps some Egyptian proposal that adds some conditions that Israel has not agreed to. And that, in a sense, this is something of a ruse to try to stall for time and pressure Israel. At the same time, we do see demonstrations now outside IDF headquarters by hostage families or supporters of those who want a deal, trying to up the pressure on the government to accept it. So clearly, the next few hours are going to be crucial in deciding whether really this is some kind of breakthrough or really it is just yet another delay in the IDF going into Rafah and completing its mission in Gaza.
And as we said, Kalev, I mean, we have to study very carefully this this suggestion or this offer by the Hamas. But at the same time, we have to continue the military operation by the IDF because this is the only leverage that we have. So in the meantime, this operation has to continue. And remembering that, as Daniel Agari said correctly, I mean, bringing back the hostages, that's the most important and urgent thing to do now. But at the same time, we have to see that this is not ending the war completely.
Right, and we should note, though, on the sake of the hostages now, 7 months, the situation, there is an argument to be made if any kind of deal is possible. This could be the last chance to free even at least some of the hostages from Gaza.
Well, absolutely. But as Yaki said, and as we've been saying since the beginning of this broadcast, the devil is in the detail. Has Hamas really signed on to a new version of this deal, which it has rejected up until now? Has it accepted the idea that this is a temporary ceasefire or not? There's nothing Hamas wants more than to isolate Israel, to isolate the Israeli war cabinet, and to just send every element that it can in its direction to pressure it to sign on to the deal and not look at the details. And it's very important that Israel avoids that trap, looks at the details and makes it clear, communicates clearly what's going on. First and foremost, by the way, with the hostage family members. I think that they should be notified first and exclusively what is going on, what's on the table. They should have a direct line of communication before the general public even.
All right, the next few hours, it sounds like it'll be crucial in the decision whether there really is any chance. Let's be hopeful that there is a chance for some of the hostages to return, but let's be extremely cautious because we've been down this road before, and here we are